Hello and welcome to LDEI Live Online. I'm your host, Dame Sheila Cry. Today we have the privilege and pleasure to learn from the life of the great cookbook author and Chinatown's advocate, Dame Grace Young. Journalist Dame Bonnie Benwick will lead her in a conversation that reflects on Grace's opportunities and challenges, the good luck and the bad luck, and the lessons learned in her life. Grace has earned many of the highest culinary awards, including 2 James Beard Awards, the Julia Child Award, and 6 IACP Cookbook Awards. Bonnie Benwick is the former Washington Post food section deputy editor and recipes editor. She is the author of the Washington Post cookbooks, Readers' Favorite Recipes. Nowadays, Bonnie works as a freelance food editor, writer, recipe tester, and developer. And now, here they are, Dames Grace Young and Bonnie Benwick.
Hi, everybody. Thanks for inviting us into your homes on a busy Monday morning. Grace and I have had lots of fun discussions. I have known her since I was working at the Post, and she wrote stories for the Post as well as every other major publication that does anything about food in the country. She only became a Dom a couple of years ago in New York, which I was kind of surprised to learn. I just figured she'd always been a Dom along with the rest of us. But I'm happy to have her as a Dom because she certainly brings a lot of prestige to our organization. So we're going to talk today about really how she got her start. I think lately people have seen her videos and social media about Chinatown and the savings of Chinatown and what's up with them, but how she got into this and sort of a career that she now describes as haphazard is something that is just fascinating to me. And so we're going to start with that, Grace, and then sort of move into how you became this kind of unannounced, unanticipated champion for someone who thinks that she describes herself as pretty not only self-effacing, but not exactly looking for the limelight, how that's managed to find you and shine a light where it's needed. So let's start with um, let's start with like earliest recollections. I think the background of your cooking resonates with a lot of people in our sort of age demographic of where you found cooking instruction and how you got inspired.
Um, so first, I just wanted to thank Sheila for the lovely introduction. And Bonnie, it's always a pleasure to be in conversation with you. My earliest recollection is I grew up in a home in San Francisco where my Cantonese parents really impressed upon me a fine appreciation of home cooking, Cantonese home cooking. And they were not trained professionally, but they were extraordinary cooks. And we ate out at restaurants occasionally. My father was a liquor salesman, and one of his main areas that he covered was Chinatown. And so all the owners of all the restaurants were generally the chefs. So he was very accustomed to walking into all the kitchens of any of the restaurants in Chinatown to get his weekly liquor order. And therefore, when we went into restaurants to eat, he would just feel comfortable strolling into the kitchen to talk to the chef about what was the best thing to eat, what was the freshest. So I grew up with uh, it was a very special experience eating very good Cantonese food. And then when I was a child, and I don't know what age, I discovered Julia Child on television. And I was completely captivated. Everything that she was making was exotic for me. And in those days, I'm so old, you would send a self-addressed envelope to receive the recipe of the week from WGBH. And I did that.
SASE. That's right.
Yeah. And then I have no recollection how I did this, but I went and bought the French Chef paperback cookbook. And I loved reading the newspaper. And one day I saw in the San Francisco Chronicle that Julia Child was coming to San Francisco for a book signing. And that was for volume 2 of Mastering the Art of French Cooking. I didn't know what a book signing was. By that point, I had already cooked a number of recipes of Julia's and was really so fascinated by these foods that I'd never had before. The first recipe I made was her brioche, and my mother was Cantonese, but she was raised in Shanghai. So she was very sophisticated. She'd gone to French bakeries, and I remember the look of amazement on her face when the kitchen filled with this intoxicating aroma. And then we opened the oven door, and the brioche were golden, puffed, and perfect. And I was hooked from that point on. I just wanted to make more and more, cook more and more recipes. But I begged my father to take off from work to take me to the White House department store for this book signing. And so I didn't realize you were supposed to buy a book, The Mastering the Art of French Cooking, Volume 2. So I brought my paperback, and Julia and Paul were there, and they both signed the book. And the book is now at the Smithsonian. I gave it to the Smithsonian after I received the Julia Child Award. And my father took a photograph, and that photograph sadly got lost over the years, but I mailed that photograph to Julia, so she autographed it for me and mailed it back. And then shortly after that, I read again in the paper that there was a French cooking teacher named Josephine Araldo, who had been Isadora Duncan's personal chef, and she was giving French cooking lessons from her home. And so I don't know how I did this, but I convinced my father to drive me to Josephine's. And I asked Josephine if I could wash dishes and help her during class in exchange for cooking lessons. And she said yes. And so 2 or 3 nights a week, my father would drive me to Josephine's. And the class started at 6:30 in the evening. And so for the first time in my life, I got to see up close what French dishes actually, tasted like, looked like. She grew her own herbs in her garden. So I'd never seen any I had never seen any herbs. So she grew her parsley, rosemary, oregano, basil. So all of that, it opened up so many doors for me.
And then I guess in high school, you got to intern in a cooking capacity as well, right?
Yeah, so in high school, I had this extraordinary high school counselor who I've now rehooked up with on Facebook. And she came up with this internship program for seniors. Whatever area of interest you had, she would try and get you an internship program. And I was the only student who said that she was interested in food. So she got me a 1-week internship program at Doe Pineapple's Test Kitchens, and also a week with a food PR company, and 1 week with a recipe developer and food stylist named Stevie Bass, who, I was just completely fascinated with recipe development and food styling. And Stevie lived in Mill Valley in this little chalet house. And so I would take the bus from San Francisco across the Golden Gate Bridge, and it was like a completely different world. And she was an extraordinary recipe developer and food stylist, and became my mentor. And she really trained me on doing recipe testing and development like a lab experiment. I had to keep meticulous records of how long I cooked something, making observations about how it looked after 2 minutes, 3 minutes, 4 minutes. The evaluation after we after I tested something, you know, whether or not we needed to boost the seasoning, whether or not the salt was too much, whether or not it was overcooked, undercooked. I had to take the internal temperature of the meat every time I cooked a recipe so that we could compare, you know, what was actually the perfect point. So, and I'm still in
This is music to my ears, of course.
Yeah, she was very, very precise, and we are still in touch. She is in New Mexico, and we exchange messages like every month or two. And so after I met her for this 1 week internship program, I begged her to allow me to work with her again. And so I worked with her that Easter vacation and then that summer and all through college. I worked for Stevie.
So great. So great. And then, of course, you managed to parlay that into a job that I'm still envious of. For those of us who are old enough to remember, Time Life Books was just a seminal whole series of really excellent. I mean, the whole you can tell us about the process of packaging and hiring those books, but how did you get that job?
So after college, I came to New York. So I don't have, in those days, if you want to do recipe development and food styling, you got a degree in home economics. And I did not get a degree in home economics. I have a degree in art history. Um, And when I graduated, I was offered a job at Doe Pineapple and at General Foods. So I took the job at General Foods and came east and worked in New York for 3 years. And then I found out and General Foods was wonderful in exposing me to the world of ad agencies, doing TV commercials, big ads, seeing the rollout of a new product. And I was lucky I had a wonderful product, Bird's Eye Vegetables, but corporate work was just horrific. And so I was keeping my radar up for anything that was interesting. And then I heard about this great job at a book packager, and their main client was Time Life Books. And they needed someone to head their test kitchen and do all the food styling. So book packagers came into being, I think, in the 1970s, and they were just sort of like a mash unit that could produce a book much faster and much more efficiently than a publisher. And we did these Time Life cookbooks like a magazine. So we could produce a cookbook I would say every 8 weeks.
Wow.
And because they were a series, there was a format. So each one, you know, you would plug it in the way you would a magazine. They had the same chapters, same divisions. And so the first series that I worked on was a series called Great Meals in Minutes.
Yes.
And it had menus contributed by famous chefs and cookbook authors. So I was calling people like Barbara Trapp, Paula Wolford, Joyce Goldstein, Mark Miller. You know, it was a who's who of the big stars from the 1980s. And this was probably in 1982, 83. And we did that series at least 2 years, possibly three. But at the company that I worked for, the book packager was called Rebus, and we did probably 40. I probably did at least 40 cookbooks for them.
Wow.
During the 15, 16 years that I worked for them, 18 years, I can't remember now.
That is an amazing foundation that nobody could touch these days in terms of when you got to write your first cookbook. I mean, my goodness, the recipe development, the testing, the attention to detail of writing recipes that people can really follow, that's just invaluable. So when did you your first cookbook was when?
My first cookbook was The Wisdom of the Chinese Kitchen, and that came out in 1999.
Mm-hmm.
And I have to say, after working with Stevie and then working for Time Life Books for 40 cookbooks, Time Life Books was so meticulous. So there was someone from Time Life Books that was checking everything that we were submitting, and they were questioning everything, you know. So it really made it really trained me to be even more precise.
Yeah. And you've gone on, I mean, boy, so you've co-authored several cookbooks, but tell me about when you got to Breath of a Wok and Stir Frying to the Sky's Edge, which I think most people on this chat are very familiar with and probably have in their stacks at home.
Um, so the reason I ended up writing my first cookbook is because a friend of mine, Pam Thomas, who was a former cookbook editor, said to me one day, "You should really write your family's recipes." And um, and it had never occurred to me.
Mm.
And I realized at that point that coming from this very traditional Chinese culinary background, I had gone off and started exploring every kind of cuisine but Chinese.
Mm.
But every time I would go home to San Francisco, um, it was so comforting to eat my family's recipes. And so I asked my cousins how many all of us had only grown up eating Chinese food and occasionally would get to eat like pizza or it was a big deal. I remember when I was a child eating a Swanson's frozen chicken dinner that was really exotic. Um, and I asked them how many Chinese dishes they knew how to make, and all of them said they only knew how to make one or two. And so I thought that it was my responsibility to record the family's recipes so they wouldn't be lost. And that's how I started writing. That's what motivated me to write Wisdom of the Chinese Kitchen. And I knew that I could write the recipes without any issues, but it was my first time writing, and I was very nervous and very insecure.
Mm.
And that set me on this whole other new path. And then from there, as you mentioned, I started writing The Breath of a Wok, which I did in collaboration with Alan Richardson, who is this incredible food photographer. And that was this amazing experience, just digging into wok culture and learning the secrets of wok culture from home cooks and chefs, not only in the United States, but going to Hong Kong and China. And then
How long was the research for that book? Because it really is quite in depth in terms of the knowledge you can pick up about woks. I mean,
I think it took me like 2 or 3 years. It was a really long process, and but just wonderful from the people for the people that I got to meet. I got to meet the great legend Florence Lynn, who um, wrote some of the seminal Chinese cookbooks, the first cookbooks that were published here in America. And by the time I met her, I think she was in her 80s and just so lovely. And I did a whole chapter devoted to her. I did a chapter devoted to Amy Tan and her sisters making dumplings. Um, Susanna Fu, Martin Yan here in the United States. And then I met wonderful restaurant chefs in Hong Kong and China. And then, we went to rural areas where we met farmers who were cooks. So it was just an amazing experience.
so for the cookbook authors among us, I mean, did you have a publisher at the time, or were you doing this on your own, or how did that work?
I was very lucky from the beginning. Wisdom of the Chinese Kitchen was picked up by Simon and Schuster, and all of my books have been published by Simon and Schuster.
That's impressive.
Yeah.
Everybody these days are sort of like free agency in baseball. You don't really have a publisher from one book to the next necessarily,
Right.
unless you're somebody like you.
Well, I was very lucky. I had a wonderful editor for Wisdom, Janice Easton Epner, and then Sydney Miner was my editor for Breath of a Walk and Stir Frying to the Sky's Edge.
And they said, sure, take 2 or 3 years. You can do this. I mean, that's also a little unheard of these days, unless there are a lot of issues with the book.
The contract was for 1 year, but I had been working on it ahead of time, right,
Ah.
in order to do the proposal and all of that. Yeah.
Mhm.
They were works, they were labors of love. And I consider each experience a gift, and especially Wisdom of the Chinese Kitchen, because now my parents have passed away, and many of the family and friends who gave me recipes have passed away. And so when I open the book, sometimes my memory isn't so good. And so I'll read something that my father said about, the way you should cut ginger, or my Auntie Margaret drinking Korean ginseng, and she lived into her 80s. It's a reminder of knowledge that I think is so important.
Mhm.
So I'm very grateful that I wrote Wisdom of the Chinese Kitchen.
Now, do you remember what was it like to also for the authors among us? What was it like to sort of promote the book? Were you ever surprised at the sort of at the audience that it gained, especially Stir Frying to the Sky's Edge, in
Um,
terms of, what was the publicity like? Were you on tour? Were there
right. Wisdom of the Chinese Kitchen was terrifying. I remember my husband drove me to JFK Airport, and I broke down crying and I said, I don't want to go. And he looked at me like I was completely nuts. And he's like, this is your moment. Like, you have to go out there and promote this book. But the idea of public speaking was really scary for me, and interview, all that was, a live demo. I was not accustomed to, I was accustomed to being behind the scenes in the test kitchen, testing recipes, doing food styling. That was my little world. And so it took me out of my comfort zone. Um, and, with each book, I got more experience. But with Wisdom of the Chinese Kitchen, there was an event where it was a Lunar New Year event, and Julia Child was invited. It was for the um, American Institute for Wine and Food. And so in public, I had to give the speech. And even the way I say it, in public, right? I gave a speech, and I was able to thank Julia publicly
Aw.
for being the reason that I even had a food career,
Mm.
and that it had come full circle to have written Wisdom of the Chinese Kitchen, because and to be doing this evening with her, because she was the reason. In one of her books, I think it's The French Chef, she goes, I wanted to take the bugaboo out of French cooking. And I
Yeah.
kept on thinking about that when I was writing Wisdom of the Chinese Kitchen, that I wanted to demystify Chinese cooking and make it more accessible to people.
Yeah.
So, yeah, so I grew in that capacity, becoming more familiar and comfortable. And I saw that Karen Cassidy is on this um, on this call, and I, at one point, for Stir Frying to the Sky's Edge, I did this. I did cooking classes for Central Market in Texas.
Oh,
And
what
I
a
would
great
go
story.
out, and I think it was just like 7 days, 7 cities, or 9 days, 9 cities. And that was brutal. It was like going on an outward bound tour. Like every morning I had to get up at 5:30 and make it to the airport, get to the city. You rented a car. I had directions that I printed out from MapQuest. It was very antiquated, right? And then I had to find my way to the hotel, find my way to Central Market, do the cooking class, and then get back to the hotel, eat something as I'm packing, and then next morning go off again.
Oh
So
God.
Yeah, I don't have the energy for that right now, but yeah, that was part of the whole experience of going out there and promoting books. And
And what was your access to ingredients like? Did you have to carry stuff with you, or what
no, I
were
mean,
what were things that were and weren't available then?
a market like Central Market was incredible because they had everything and they had amazing staff that had already pulled like whatever exotic ingredient they didn't have at Central Market. But there were other tours that I went on that were horrifying. I did like a 15 city tour for Sur La Table, and every single kitchen that I was in looked the same, but was slightly different. And so it would be this like crazy experience of like opening a drawer where yesterday the knives were to the right of the oven. And today the knives were where I just saw them. Was that next to the refrigerator drawer? Or so and sometimes the quality of the food was horrible. The person would say to me they had bought the chicken 4 days earlier, like I had a stench when I opened up the package. So there were some hair-raising experiences, but I survived it all and I grew from it. It helped me to learn to do public speaking. And yeah, they're very rich and wonderful memories.
So let's back up a little bit to when you were growing up. Tell us about what Chinatowns were like, because I think these days there's a very different experience for everybody. And some of us certainly remember going to Chinatowns when they were bustling and thriving. But when you grew up with it, tell me the kind of relationships you had. You knew mom and pop stores. There were smells and sights and sounds and people eating and coming from different places. Talk a little bit about that.
I love this question. Thank you, Bonnie. So I grew up in San Francisco, and as I mentioned to you, my father was a liquor salesman. And so often, especially in the summer, I would ride around in the car with him as he called on different accounts. And then inevitably, he would end up in Chinatown, often before lunch, so that we could have lunch in Chinatown. Um, and walking down Grant Avenue with my father was this very special experience. It was, um, I felt like everybody knew him and he knew everybody. It was this small town America feeling. And every few steps, he would bump into somebody or pass a shop that he knew, and they would call out his name. Um, my uncles and aunts owned restaurants. I had my auntie Margaret and Uncle Stephen had a restaurant called Sanya. There was a restaurant that was extremely famous in Chinatown that existed for over 70 years called Sun On Herong, owned by other family members. The largest supermarket was owned by my godmother and her husband's family, Wing Sung Chong. So it was just a very intimate community, and it was thriving. Everybody, it was very safe in Chinatown. Um, yeah, so that was a very, very special experience for me, which is why now seeing San Francisco's Chinatown is apparently quiet at 3 to 4 o'clock in the afternoon. There's no night business. When I was growing up, San Francisco's Chinatown was hopping until 2, 3, 4 o'clock in the morning. People would go there late at night to eat. It was totally safe. Um, and nowadays, so many Asian Americans, Chinese Americans do not feel safe being out at night for fear of anti-Asian hate crimes.
Yeah, this really brings us to your more recent, rebirth really as an outspoken advocate for what's happening with Chinatowns, not only in the United States, but in Canada. Through your conversation I had with you recently, I was surprised to learn that the Canadian Chinatowns aren't doing very well, and I'm familiar with several of those. My relatives, I have a lot of Canadian relatives in cities with who that had bustling Chinatowns. But tell me about when Chinatowns, when you noticed that they were changing, were diminishing, were having issues.
So, Chinatowns in general have been struggling in the last decade or so. One of the reasons is, um, mom and pop businesses used to be the backbone of America. And nowadays, there are so many of these big chain supermarkets, and people are so accustomed to buying things online. Um, if you think of any Chinatown, at least 95, 98% of the businesses are mom and pop. And and in addition to and so it's just harder for a mom and pop business to exist. On top of that, Chinese restaurants, so often um, the the owners have brought their children up to have higher education, and the last thing they want is for their children to return to the restaurant and to work. And so, all across America, Chinese restaurants at this point are endangered of um, having to close because the next generation is not is has no desire to carry on the business. That's been an issue, and on top of that, gentrification is a big issue in Chinatown because a few years ago I wanted to help a friend get an apartment in Chinatown, and I thought, crazy me, that I could get an inexpensive apartment in Chinatown for my friend. And all the friends in New York City's Chinatown looked at me like I was insane. Like the prices in Chinatown now for apartments are absolutely as high as the rest of the city. That there's been so much gentrification, and it's no longer 100% of the population are Chinese or Asian American. Um, there's a huge, I forgot the figure, but it's only like 45% or so of the population are actually Asian Americans. So there's been gentrification. And so now if you're a new immigrant and you're coming into Chinatown, in the old days, that was your stepping stone to start your life in America or in New York City. And now it's completely unaffordable. So new immigrants live typically in Brooklyn or Queens or Harlem and then come into the city for their jobs.
Yeah, they're generally, I mean, in the DC area and the suburbs, which are vast around, they're called the DMV. There are suburbs and there are pockets of Asian American communities who live, fairly close to these big, H Mart type stores. And that's where you can get anything that I presumably you could have gotten in Chinatown and, probably for less money these days. So that's had something to do with it. But particularly, I think I think we all are aware that COVID had a deleterious effect on all kinds of businesses, but tell me about what it did to Chinatown specifically.
So in January of 2020, so I live relatively close to Chinatown, and I normally walk into Chinatown 2 or 3 times a week. January of 2020, before there were any incidents of COVID in America, and certainly not in Chinatown, I went into Chinatown and it was empty. There was nobody on Mont Street. There were no cars driving down Mont Street. Normally, I'm jostling, down Mont Street trying to make my way. When I get to the markets, I'm sort of like, arm to arm with the aunties and the grandmothers and the moms, like buying produce, picking what produce that we want. There was nobody. And as I came down Mott Street, I was looking into restaurants, and through the windows, I could see that the restaurants were empty. The waiters were all standing around, and it was freezing cold. I saw outdoor fruit vendor with no one, standing out there just alone. And so I did one post on Instagram and Facebook that just showed the photo of this fruit vendor, produce vendor, and I said, we have to support Chinatown. There's no business right now, and if this continues, this will be the end of Chinatown. Chinatown is perfectly safe, and these businesses need our help more than ever. And Kat Kinsman from Food and Wine saw that post, and she reached out to me and she said, would you please write whatever essay you want for Food and Wine magazine about Chinatown. So I wrote this piece, and I contacted lots of locals because I didn't feel that my perspective was necessarily totally accurate, since I'm not a local from New York City's Chinatown. So I wanted to make sure that I represented what was happening in Chinatown as accurately as possible. But that piece got so much feedback and outpouring of love, and so many people said they had no idea that Chinatown was struggling. And then the turning point for me was, and then I reached out to the local NPR station, WNYC, got on, talked about how it was really important to show our support to Chinatown. And that's where all of my experience that, I started with Wisdom of the Chinese Kitchen, feeling so shy and uncomfortable doing public speaking. But that's where it all kicked in. And I was able to reach out to different people in the media to say, we need to do a story about what's happening to Chinatown.
So you talked about the safety issue a little bit. I don't know if everybody remembers. I try to block out anything that had to do with COVID on a regular basis, but there was sort of talk about, where COVID came from, and that, that to me, that sort of lent an air of maybe why people didn't think it was safe to be there.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
The assumption was if you went to Chinatown, that COVID was a Chinese disease, and if you went to Chinatown, you will catch COVID. And 2020, 21, 22, 23, anti-Asian hate crimes were really scary in New York City and in many parts of America. So yeah, so I just kept on speaking out or doing posts on social media. And then a real turning point was on Friday, March 13th. I received a call from the executive director of Poster House Museum, which is this tiny little museum in New York City that had just opened. And they had opened with an exhibition of posters of Chinatown, not posters of China, Chinese posters. And they had talked to me, not this executive director, but someone else from the museum, about doing some lectures about food and culture. And now Julia Knight, who I didn't know at all, calls me and says, we know Chinatown is hurting. Is there anything you can think of that we can do to help Chinatown? So you would have thought this call would come from Asia Society or China Institute, but no, it was from Poster House Museum. And I was so touched by this call. And I said to her, I've been thinking about going to Chinatown and interviewing owners of restaurants and shops and posting these videos on Instagram and Facebook. And I think if New Yorkers actually heard how much they're suffering, because since January, many of them lost 80% of their business. So
Wow.
now we were at March 13th. And yeah, how can you exist with 20% of your business? I said, I think people will rally their support and show up. We need to get word out there because New Yorkers care about Chinatown. They just don't know what's happening. And she said, if you do these videos, we will put them on the Poster House website. And they're still on the Poster House website. And so we did. So I put a post up asking for a volunteer videographer, and I was given an angel, this man named Dan On. and we met on Sunday, March 15th, and we did 5 or 6 interviews. And we did not know that hours later, Mayor de Blasio would completely shut down New York City. So these videos are important oral history of one of the most tragic moments in Chinatown history. And every single interview, I just had a lump in my throat and tears in my eyes. And Dan and I had just met, and we just kept on looking at each other as we were doing these interviews, because what the people were saying was just so heartbreaking. And one of the most powerful was going into Hop Key, which is a restaurant that has existed since the 1960s. And he talked about how all of his employees had been with him for years. And he had made the decision that the next day they were shutting because they just couldn't keep on going like this. And when we went there, he brought us into the kitchen. And I've been in so many Chinese restaurant kitchens. They're always loud, with the stir frying, the chopping, the washing of the dishes. This
Lots going on.
was silent.
Hmm.
And the look on the people's faces of fear, and none of us knew what was happening, but we all knew that that the situation was just horrible and untenable. And so and that feeling and that experience of seeing the looks on all the owners or managers' faces and the employees still is in me, but it stayed with me for the next few years. I always would think about the fact that all of these people have no way of getting their story out. None of them know anyone in the media. None of them speak English very well, or even if they spoke English well, they're not accustomed to doing an interview. So I realize that even though my nature is normally quiet and reserved, I needed to step up and speak up on their behalf. And that's what motivated me to do the work that I did.
Yeah, it certainly have. And really, so much of this, it's not just San Francisco or New York City. You told me you visited Chinatowns really all over, in Honolulu specifically. Talk a little bit about that Chinatown, which I would have hoped would have been a little bit immune to any of this.
So I'm lucky because Haley is on this call. Haley Matson Mathis, excuse me. Dame Haley invited me to do a special program in Honolulu in January of last year, 2024.
Go Doms.
Les Dames, yeah. And she asked me to do a stir fry class for her Hawaii Culinary Education Foundation, but also to do a public program that was co-sponsored by Les Dames. And that was extraordinary, but it also gave me the opportunity to visit Honolulu's Chinatown for the first time in my life. And it is the most special Chinatown out of all the Chinatowns in America, because it actually feels like you're in Asia, because so much of it is outdoors, like you're in Singapore or Hong Kong with wet markets, and all the produce that they're selling is being grown in Hawaii, so exotic papayas and mangoes and mangosteens. It's just what is available is extraordinary. But it's also extremely heartbreaking because by 3 or 4 in the afternoon, Chinatown is closing down because there are no customers. So when I did the public program, it was so fascinating to talk about the importance of supporting America's Chinatowns, and then to have people speak up during the Q&A that they live in Honolulu, but they never think about going to Chinatown, but now they will, right? So Chinatowns are being forgotten. So many people just automatically go to Trader Joe's, Costco to get their shopping done, and they stop thinking about the little mom and pop markets, restaurants, and this is why these ethnic enclaves are struggling. And then thanks to Haley giving me this idea that I could do a public program, a few months later, I was invited to speak at UMass Amherst about my work supporting America's Chinatowns. And then I thought to myself, on the way home, I should stop in Boston and check out what's going on in Boston, and maybe I can do a public program similar to what Haley set up for me in Honolulu. So Haley introduced me to Dame Robin Cohen, the president of Les Dames in Boston, and she set up this amazing evening where we did an event at a restaurant, Pagu. I was interviewed and talked about the importance of supporting America's Chinatowns, and I was able to do an interview with the local NPR station earlier that afternoon. And the next day I did more stuff with America's Test Kitchen. And then from that point, Philly's Chinatown has really been struggling, and they were facing at that point the threat of the arena being built in Chinatown. They'd been fighting that for the last 2 years. So I saw Dame Kathy Gold at the Cherry Bomb conference last summer, and also Dame Ellen Yin from High Street. And then I got in touch with them and said, can we do a program in Philly? And that just happened January of this year. And that was extraordinary because we were able to raise, to not only do a great event, but raise money for Chinatown.
That's so great. That's
We
so great.
raised money in Boston too. So I'm very, very grateful to Les Dames for giving me so much support.
And now's a pretty good time. I asked Grace to come up with a list of sort of what we could do in her recommendations for, instead of sending money to some foundation that sounds like a good idea, she really wants us to be consumers and to visit these mom and pop shops, and some of them, a few of them, not very many, are online. Just buy the products. So she came up with a great list, including recommendations for products that she gets from these stores. And Sheila has just posted that in the chat. So you guys can download it and have a Grace Young recommended list, which I'm very happy to have. Speaking of the videos, you're traveling around and you're doing this on your own dime pretty much, which I think is amazing and impressive, and thank you for that. But you've gotten some, and you're trying to get some pretty influential names to sort of even bring the notion of supporting Chinatown to the fore. So tell us a little bit about that, and then I guess in a few minutes we'll take some questions.
As many of you know, there have been these 145% tariffs on goods from China, and that has been the 1-2 punch that there are many business owners now actually speaking up when they normally don't, that this will kill Chinatown businesses. And as of this morning, the announcement just came out that the tariffs have been brought down to 30%. So I'm afraid that people will think to themselves, oh, there's no problem now. It's only 30%. So
it's for 90 days, but who knows?
Yeah, I just wanted to tell one very important story, and that is in 2020, there is a restaurant in New York City's Chinatown called Hop Lee, and they had a lunch for $5.95. How you could sell a lunch for $5.95 and make money is completely insane to me. But it speaks to the fact that all Chinatown businesses operate on razor thin margins, right? And so how you could buy the food, prep it, cook it, serve it, pay for the waiters, and then wash the dishes and still make a profit from $5.95 is impossible. In 2020, New York City passed a law enabling restaurants to charge a COVID tax. So you could increase the price of every meal by 10% to cover like extra costs that were incurred. So Hopley could have charged an extra 59 cents, but they didn't because they were afraid that that 59 cents would turn away customers. So they continued selling their lunch at $5.95, even though they had only 20% of their regular customer base. So they were struggling and still scared to hike it up 10%. So that's why, even though these tariffs have been cut down to from 145% to 30%, you may think to yourself, oh, Chinatown will be fine now.
Oh, there's also that congestion pricing in Manhattan, right?
Yes, thank you for bringing that up. So in January of this year, congestion pricing started, which means that any car entering New York City and going south of 60th Street is charged $9. And that alone has cut business in New York City's Chinatown 35 to 40%. This is not an official figure. This is the number that I get from all the owners and managers that I've talked to. And so they're all saying Chinatown is already a ghost town, and then they got hit with 145% tariffs. And so even now it's come down to 30%. Many of these businesses are actually saying we can only last 2 or 3 months. We can't pay the rent, right? Because their customer base is a customer base that is not wealthy. These are most of the people that shop in Chinatown, the locals live on low incomes. And I think the 28% in New York City's Chinatown live below the poverty line. Wow. So once the prices go up even a tiny bit, they lose the business. So that's why it's so important that all of us support all, as much as you can, your local Chinatown. And if you don't have a local Chinatown, your local AAPI businesses, because 90% of what they're selling is coming from China. And so all the other Chinatowns are not dealing with congestion pricing, but they have, for the last 5 years, from Honolulu's Chinatown to New York City, they've been dealing with, they have not recovered since the pandemic. They have less foot traffic, less tourism, and the historic Chinatowns like New York, San Francisco, Boston are dependent on tourism. And with the latest policies, tourism is already projected to be down throughout the United States. In New York City, it's projected to be 17% less than what it has been. So, and they're already dealing with inflation before any of these tariffs kicked in. So,
yes, so tell us about these big shot names that you're getting to talk about it.
Oh, so I was very lucky. I was invited to a food conference in Italy like 6 weeks ago, and I met Whoopi Goldberg. And sometimes I just have chutzpah, and I went up and I spoke.
Oh, I think you have quite a bit, actually.
So the morning after she spoke at the conference, I saw her in the breakfast room in the distance, and all of a sudden I thought, you have to go and speak to Whoopi. So I went up to speak to her, and she couldn't have been nicer, and she was there with her business partner, and we spoke for about 15 or 20 minutes. I wasn't sure what I was doing. I had no plan. And then just as we were, as I was speaking to her, I thought, you should ask Whoopi if she would do a video reminding folks to support Chinatown. So I asked her, and she said, yeah, hell yeah. And so right there on the spot, I shot her, and she only said, support your local Chinatowns. Where would we be without them? Perfect. And so it gave me the idea that I should reach out to as many big names as possible, and nothing political. You don't even have to mention anything about the tariffs. Just remind your followers the importance of supporting your local Chinatown. And I saw Dory Greenspan at the Cherry Bomb Conference this year, and I asked her, and she came to me and said that she was really impressed with the work that I've been doing and very supportive. And I said, would you do a video? And she said, of course, but I'm leaving for Paris tomorrow. But she just posted this wonderful video last week, and it's from the heart. And so now I just want to reach out to as many big names as I can in the food world, but also any Whoopi-like celebs out there. That would be wonderful. So if anybody out there knows someone, please let me know and I'll send them my little pitch.
All right, how should they contact you?
Just they can email me or send me a message on Instagram. Anyway, my email is wisdom@graceyoung.com.
Okay. All right. So we've got a few minutes. If people want to put questions in the chat, Sheila can look at them. We can look at them. In the meantime, there's another short list of articles related to tariffs. Obviously, it doesn't take into consideration the one from today, which we can add and send to you later. And this this conversation is being recorded. So if you registered for the event, you can see it. You'll be able to get a link to view it, and it'll be on the LDEI website, I think. Yeah. So
And
What Janet says, what's your favorite dish to cook?
oh, it's probably it's definitely a stir fry. My father was the one who imparted to me his love and passion of stir fries and stir fries that are made properly with wok hay, the breath of a wok. My parents taught me a wonderful stir fry that is in Wisdom of the Chinese Kitchen and also in Stir Frying to the Sky's Edge, which is a stir fry of chicken and ginger and shiitake mushrooms that is put over a small pot of rice. Traditionally, it's done in a sand pot. And so the rice isn't quite done when you put the stir fry over, and the stir fry isn't quite done, but the heat from the rice and the juices from the chicken sink into the rice. So yeah, that's one of my favorites.
Oh, it sounds so good.
Yeah.
What's your favorite rice?
I just generally buy just long grain white. I don't go by brand at all. I did want to mention that I wanted to provide businesses that we can support. And sadly, I contacted my contacts in Chinatowns all across the country. And most businesses don't have websites and don't have an online presence. New York City has the most, and they really have it's the second generation that has created the websites, right? The older generation doesn't have the savvy to do it. So I wanted to provide links to businesses that are real businesses. So like Ho Wing Hong is a family-owned supermarket. Grand Tea Imports is a multi-generational tea store in New York City. The Po Wing Hong site is actually down right now. So can you imagine? They're dealing with the tariffs, they're dealing with congestion pricing, and the site is having trouble. But if there's anything that you want to buy from them, you can just call. I provided the phone number and ask for this woman, Meng, and they will put the order through for you. But they're so much more reasonable than, buying on Amazon and even like some of the other like H Marts out there. Their prices are so fair and the quality of the goods that they carry are really incredible.
Yeah, and now's a good time to buy before anything gets any more expensive, right?
Right.
So, any other questions, Sheila? I'm racking my brain about what kind of big name celebs or somebody that I can send to you, Grace. All of us, Dom, should put our thinking caps on and send recommendations to Grace because she's pretty good at organizing and getting these people motivated to do it.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, Whoopi's video is 7 seconds. Like, and they can shoot it from their home. It doesn't have to be standing in Chinatown. It doesn't have, and it's what she said is just so beautiful. And I just have this vision, you know, in the 1970s, there was the I Love New York campaign that Milton Glaser created, and I want an I Love Chinatown campaign. So I'm just going to start, you know, keep asking.
Good for you. I'm just amazed at the breadth of your career and that you're being able to do this really without, it's not like some big organizations propping you up to do this. It's just your passion and your drive to make this an issue that everybody cares about is really something, particularly now that we just seem so distracted by a lot of different things, but this is something really small and tangible that all of us can do.
Yeah, and I feel really grateful. What happened in the pandemic is just so horrific, but it brought out a whole different side of my personality that I didn't even know existed. I've never done anything in the world of activism or advocacy. And yeah, to be in my 60s and to have to discover a new part of myself and to realize that I can make a difference is a wonderful gift. And this is the most meaningful work that I've done, and everything built up to it. Right? As I said, I was so shy about even doing public speaking when my first cookbook came out, and all my connections and the skill set that I have was perfect for this moment.
My people call it a mitzvah and part of Tikkun Olam, which means repair the world.
Yeah.
So, Sheila, back over to you. I think we're almost there.
Thank you so much, both of you, Grace and Bonnie. And I would just like to thank you for opening your hearts to us today.
It's been my pleasure and an honor, and thank you, Bonnie, so much for agreeing to do this. I loved your questions today.
Good, good. You certainly get a lot of them. We'll all work on this, right, Doms? Shoulders to the whatever.
Before we go, be sure to register for our next live online program, which is free of charge for members of LDEI and a mere $10 for non-members. On May 27th, Tambra Ray Stevenson will show us how artificial intelligence will help us food entrepreneurs, chefs, and creatives to make compelling content, striking visuals, and a consistent brand voice. To learn more and to register, go to ldei.org and click on the Live Online tab. We know that there are many demands on your time, and LDEI Live Online strives to bring you useful and interesting content to build your business and enrich your life. Thank you for attending, and so long until May 27th.